famous film An Inconvenient Truth said, "The moral imperative to make big changes is inescapable." And never has this statement been more true than in today's world. Global warming, climate change, and the sea level rising is a huge problem, one that's been swept under the rug by most people in society. And personally, I've kind of never really thought about global warming, other than when I saw these ads on TV about the polar bears. I always thought it was this big problem that was way out in the distance, not something that I would deal with or something that I should dwell on because it was just too big. And of course I felt sad for the polar bears, but it wasn't until a few weeks ago when I was panicking about ideas for this project that my teacher made me aware of an article about a small nation in the Pacific where people are having to evacuate their homes because of the sea level rising. And this nation is called Kiribati, and it's made up of 33 islands and atolls and at its highest point, it's only 2 meters above sea level. And this one article made me realize that global warming has an incredible effect on more than just mammals, and that entire cultures and people and way of life that I'd never even known about could be swept beneath the waves. And this people would kind of just disappear because we wouldn't know. There's not much about them, and there's not much being done for them. So after I read this article, I started doing some research. And the global Earth temperature has raised by 1 degree Celsius, which doesn't sound too bad. But if the temperature rises between 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, as it's projected to do, the ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica will collapse. And alone, each ice sheet could cause the sea level to rise by 20 feet. So the reason that the sea level is rising is because the air temperature is warming. And this is because the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased so much since the industrial age to 400 parts per million. And as the atmospheric layer thickens because of the CO2, the sun's infrared light, which it sends down to warm up the Earth, can't escape because it tries to leave the atmosphere to keep it so that we're not a desert. And it hits the CO2 that's kind of just dead in the atmosphere and comes back in. And so, because of this, the Earth is warming. And the ocean, the water, absorbs 90% of the light it comes in contact with. So if more infrared light is being trapped in the Earth, more of it is being absorbed by the water. So the water temperature is rising. So the sea-based ice, which is in the water, is melting because it's in contact with these warmer waters. And when the sea-based ice melts, the land-based ice, there's nothing to buffer the land-based ice from falling into the ocean when it cracks, which it does, which is normal. For example, the Larsen B ice shelf in Antarctica was a land-based ice shelf, but the sea-based ice around it melted. So when the Larsen B ice shelf cracked and fell into the water, it only took 35 days to completely melt. I think the biggest impact, though, we've seen is in Greenland, where in July, 97% of its surface ice coverage melted in just 4 days. It went from that to that, which is incredible. So you're probably wondering, how does this connect to Kiribati? So since 1880, the sea level has risen by 20 centimeters, and the melting ice sheets have accounted for 20% of the sea level rise over the past 2 decades. And this doesn't sound like very much, but if your home is only 2 meters above the sea level, this is a huge and very scary amount. And even if the carbon dioxide level is stabilized, which they won't because we're not going to reduce our emissions, the sea will continue to rise by at least 2 meters by the end of the century, which means that no matter what, Kiribati is going to go under. And this is why we have to deal with this problem now. So Kiribati is located in the Pacific. It's about a 7-hour plane ride from Australia, 10 from America, and it's surrounded by water and islands. There's not much out there. And so these people have kind of been forgotten. And the president of Kiribati, President Anote Tong, is now trying to decide what he should do with his sinking island and the people who live there, who some of them have already had to evacuate their homes. In the outer islands, water has already inundated many homes, and this is an abandoned meeting hall of an outer island where 100 residents already had to move inland. And these people are just like us. They're incredibly proud, and they like to sing and dance and chat, and they like to watch sports games, and they go to town hall meetings, and they don't want to leave their homes, just like any of us wouldn't. And they have this whole culture and this whole way of life that is being forgotten about by the rest of the world. And so of this 100,000 person population, 51,000 live on this island called Tarawa. And Tarawa is the size of New York with a population density of 5,200 people per square kilometer. And since the Kiribati people are deeply religious, they don't believe in birth control, so the population is increasing all the time, and their resources and their landmass is diminishing. And this is a huge problem because refugees from the outer islands, like I spoke about before, are flooding into Tarawa to find homes and to find jobs. But there's not enough space for everyone. So they're building these shacks, these little shanties, on spaces where human habitation is banned, such as the Tarawa waterlands, which is their main source of fresh water. And the waterlands is shrinking because it's located between the sea and the island, and as the sea level rises, the fresh water is being pushed up towards the island, and the fresh water is seeping through the coral that makes up the island and being wasted. And it's predicted that the waterlands will shrivel by 65% within the next 40 years. So this is why President Tong believes his people need to evacuate now. Because he doesn't want to have to deal with thousands of climate change refugees and figuring out where to put them in a few years when no one wants them and their homes are disappearing and many of them will die. So he's kind of sent out a plea for help all across the globe, and only New Zealand and Australia have responded. That's it. They only take 75 migrants per year. That's barely a fraction of the amount that will need to be evacuated in the future. And this is kind of President Tong's biggest frustration, is that not enough is being done, and that the nations who are most responsible for global warming and greenhouse gas emissions won't take responsibility and won't take action and help out the nations that they've affected because of our greed and industrialization, and that really haven't contributed to global warming at all. And so this is President Tong says, a quote by him, "Others are bound to suffer. We're gone, but somebody else will be gone next. We will be victims regardless. But I think that the point is, if nothing is done, other people, other countries of the world will be next on the front line." And his words are so true. It is predicted that we could have 200 million climate change refugees from places like Bangladesh, Indonesia, China, Vietnam, and even in America. If the sea level rises by 1 meter, 117 million people in Asia will be exposed to water inundation alone, and hundreds of people will be sent inland. Florida could be submerged, and the World Trade Center could go completely under. These predictions make it seem like we don't need to deal with this problem now because these events will be happening for such a long time, but already residents in nations other than Kiribati have had to be evacuated. 11,000 people from Tuvalu have had to leave their homes. 300,000 people in the Maldives need to be relocated. And a little town in Alaska called Nutuk, the people there can watch the ocean eating away at their land. We could lose these nations off the face of the globe, and we might not even know about it because we don't really hear about them in the news. And honestly, nothing is being done for them. And that's because there's no migration category specific to climate change, and people leaving their homes because of global warming aren't protected as refugees under the definition of refugee, which is a person who has a well-founded fear of persecution in their homeland because of their race, religion, and nationality of membership of a particular group. And because of this very limited and specific definition, when migrants' visas expire, they can be forced to return to their sinking countries because they don't fall under this category. Which leads me to my first solution, that we need to add to the definition of refugee and make it so that it protects people who have a well-founded fear of death, starvation, etc. in their homeland because of their location to the ocean and their loss of natural resources like food, fresh water, and land. And so once a person is included in this definition, once climate change refugees are protected, we need to increase our immigration quota. And this is because climate change refugees are going to become the most prominent type of refugee in the upcoming years. And we have to accept them and embrace them. And we need to fight for them now, because if we don't, who will fight for us in the future? If we don't try to secure their identity and their culture, what will become of our identities and our cultures and our home when we're faced with the same problem and we have to evacuate our homes, which it's predicted that we might? So this leads me to my next point, that we need to set up a standard of treatment for migrants. They should never feel discriminated against or inferior to the people of the host nation, and they should always have equal rights and opportunities and equal protection in their new country. And this kind of goes along with the president of the country, before it's too late, needs to set up schools in his sinking nation to teach the residents skills that will allow them to contribute to their new society when they do have to evacuate. And this leads me to my final and probably most important point, is that the president of the nation should be allowed to keep his or her seat in the United Nations. And the people who have to evacuate should always be able to identify with their birth country. They should always have a voice in world affairs. This ensures that their culture and their identity and their way of life won't be lost when they are forced to leave their homes, and that they can always kind of identify with their home even though it's not physically there. And kind of more importantly than that, they won't just disappear, and big developed nations who have caused this global warming won't get away with it. They'll always be reminded of the fact that we did this to you, we caused this, and you were affected by it. This happened because of us, and they won't forget about the effects of their actions. If we're unwilling to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and reduce our carbon footprint, then we have to take responsibility for that choice. And there's not many ways that we can reverse global warming. Unfortunately, these catastrophic events are already in place, but we can ensure a better future for those affected by it. And we can show them that there's a bright light at the end of this tunnel. Thank you.